natural resources of their ancestral homeland. Thank you all for tuning in. Town Hall is proud to be a community-focused organization and a place where we can share and sustain ideas and creativity, even if it means we can't gather in person. I'd like to thank Roger for appearing tonight to help make that possible. Town Hall will be continuing to produce virtual content this fall, and many of our past talks are available in video or podcast form on our digital media library. Town Hall is adding new events and podcasts every day. Upcoming programs include Philip Norman with a new biography of hometown hero Jimi Hendrix in the 50th year after his death, Dr. David Eagleman with science about creating new senses for humans, Charles Kupchan with Walter Russell Mead about the past and future of American isolationism, and more. Town Hall and the nonprofit community at large have been put under significant strain due to the event cancellations and the ever-changing landscape. We hope you'll consider extending your generosity to help support us during this difficult time by making a donation by clicking on the donate button at the bottom of your screen or becoming a member. You can make a donation online or text Town Hall to 44321 to give. Our partner booksellers have been hit by the negative effects of the COVID outbreak and can use your support as well. If you're interested in supporting local independent bookstores by purchasing a copy of the book being presented tonight, please use the link on this live stream page to purchase through Third Place Books. For viewers who want to watch this broadcast with closed captioning, we recommend viewing the stream via our YouTube page linked here in the chat. To enable real-time closed captioning, click the CC button in the bottom right corner of the video player. Tonight's presentation will be about 30 minutes, followed by Q&A. Roger will select questions from those submitted in the Ask a Question field at the bottom center of your screen. You can also vote on which questions will be addressed by clicking the arrow next to the question to upvote it. We cannot guarantee that we'll be able to address every question, but we'll try to get to as many as possible. Please keep your questions concise and in the form of a question. Town Hall's work is made possible through your support and the support of our sponsors. Our Civic Series is supported by Real Networks Foundation, True Brown Foundation, KUOW, and Wyncote Foundation Northwest. Finally, Town Hall is a member-supported organization, so I'd like to thank all of our members watching tonight. Roger L. Martin is a professor emeritus at the Rotman School of Management at the University of Toronto, where he served as dean from 1998 to 2013, and as institute director of the Martin Posterity Institute from 2013 to 2019. In 2017, he was named the world's #1 management thinker by Thinkers 50. He is a trusted advisor to the CEOs of companies worldwide, including Procter & Gamble, Lego, and Ford. Martin's book, When More Is Not Better, Overcoming America's Obsession with Economic Efficiency, is the topic of tonight's talk. Please join me in welcoming Roger L. Martin.
Megan, thank you for that very kind introduction. And it's great to be hosted by Seattle Town Hall, of course, like everybody else. I wish I was there. I wish I was there in Seattle. And after this, traipsing up to Chateau Saint Michel, one of my favorite wineries to visit. But we'll have to make do from afar. So as Megan said, I'll give a little overview of the book, and then I'm delighted to answer questions. So why don't we hop into the book? So When More Is Not Better, Overcoming America's Obsession with Economic Efficiency is the topic. And I'd say we've been on a very long journey, becoming ever more obsessed with economic efficiency along the way. And for a long time, more economic efficiency was actually better. And I would argue that in the last 40 years or so, we've turned to a place where more is absolutely not better, and it is making some things worse in ways that we didn't anticipate and don't, and I would argue don't want. So where did that journey get started? A journey that was positive for a while and has turned negative. So next. Started with Adam Smith, 1776, published The Wealth of Nations, same year that our country was founded, of course. And in that book, one of the famous stories from the book, one of the most memorable, is the story of the pin factory, where he pointed out or made the argument that if you had each person making an entire pin, you'd be less efficient than if you had division of labor. You'd had somebody making the shaft, somebody making the head, and somebody putting them together. You could be more efficient. And that was very influential. The founding fathers kind of all are known to have read Adam Smith, and it featured very prominently in the newly formed America. But that sort of push for efficiency got another accelerator in 1819. Next, please, with another Brit named David Ricardo, who's the father of comparative advantage. He's the gentleman who wrote about the fact that the Portuguese farmers should grow grapes because they've got lots of natural sun. They should grow grapes and make wine. English farmers should raise sheep because they don't have sun. They've got better conditions for that. Make wool, and the Brits should make wool and woolen garments and trade them with the Portuguese for their wine, and that is going to be more efficient than both countries making both of those products, because each has got comparative advantage in the other one. So another push towards, here's how we can organize ourselves to be more efficient, and it both explained the rise in trade and spurred the rise in trade. Again, good things that made our economy more efficient. America was from early on a trading nation. Then, if we move even forward to the turn of the 20th century, next slide, please. Frederick Winslow Taylor, famous for the idea that if you really analyzed in a scientific fashion, it's called scientific management, if you analyzed in a very scientific fashion work, use stopwatch studies to figure out how work should be done, you could figure out for each laborer what would be the most efficient way to do a task. What is the optimal amount of coal on a single shovelful of coal to have the maximum moved without tiring the worker out too much? You could understand that and make any operation that you wanted to work on more efficient. And here entered, I would argue, the sort of the metaphor of the machine, right? As business and the economy as a machine. You could use time and motion studies to figure out how to optimize, how to perfect the machine and make it the most perfectly efficient it could be. The march continued. Next slide, please. After World War II, with W. Edwards Deming, the great kind of American equality theorist, who became famous first in Japan by working in post-war Japan on the efficiency of their economy. And what Edwards Deming showed is that you could eliminate waste from processes, unnecessary waste from processes, by focusing on the total quality of the process, famous for influencing Toyota with the Toyota production system. So further extending the idea that we must pursue efficiency, and there are methods for pursuing efficiency. And that got us by our bicentenary, 1976, 200 years later. We were an extremely efficient nation. We were the most powerful economic force on the planet. Large companies, very efficient. So efficiency was a good thing that increased the productivity of the country, increased standards of living dramatically. So much so that in the years leading up to 1976, the median income, so the median family, the family right in the middle of the distribution, their income was growing at 2.4% compound a year. And why is that important? Well, it means that family income of the median family was doubling every 30 years. So efficiency was good for us. However, by that time, by 1976, the view had become, I would argue, that, next slide please, that more efficiency is always better. Always better. So there's no end to it. If you can make a process, a company, a piece of the economy more efficient, that is the ultimate goal. And so in the wake of that period, and starting in that period, we said, to be more efficient, to align managers with the interest of shareholders with stock-based compensation. It will be more efficient to keep opening America to trade. Even though David Ricardo wrote his opus magnum in 1819, America actually didn't get on the free and open trade bandwagon until 1960 with the Kennedy rounds of GATT. And by the mid to late 70s and 80s, America was the leader in the world in pushing for more and more open, freer trade, because that was going to make us more efficient. And companies started to move to the Sun Belt from northern states, because northern states were unionized. Southern states, Sun Belt states, many of them were not. That was going to be more efficient in terms of labor cost. Offshoring to foreign countries, China, India, etc., because that was going to make you more efficient. Capital structures were viewed as more efficient if you levered them up and had more debt in the capital structure. What followed 1976 was a move to create an efficiency defense for mergers. So even though in the early days of trust busting, Teddy Roosevelt, the laws were designed to say, even if you're efficient, if you're Standard Oil, and yes, it's efficient to own the entire oil refining and distribution business in the US, we don't care, it's bad for consumers and will break you up. That actually diminished in this era, so much so that we now have as many or more giants as we had in the trust busting era. We went at overhead cost reduction, making that more efficient, allowing capital markets to merge because that would be more efficient, having staffing algorithms to make sure that you had the minimum number of people necessary on the store floor in order to serve customers. All of these things were part of a movement that said this long-term fealty to efficiency is going to be accelerated, and no amount of pursuit of efficiency is too much. More efficiency is always better. Now, what was the sort of the if you will, the meta theory behind that? It had to do with what we thought this pursuit of efficiency, this treating the economy like a machine that could be perfected by pursuing efficiency, what kind of outcomes were we going to get? And the shape of the outcomes we assumed, next slide, was this, which is a normal distribution, Gaussian distribution, bell curve, whatever way you want to describe it. And that's sort of ensconced in the way Americans think about the economy, and most developed countries think. What do we have in the middle of this curve? We have a big middle class that makes middle incomes. The families have middle incomes. Then we have smaller tails of rich people on the right, smaller tails of poorer families on the left. And that's the distribution of outcomes in the economy. And, you know, in the American economy and most developed economies, the thesis further is we tax the people on the right tail, the richer families, to make the lives of the poorer families better off, so that it ensures them the benefits and the fruits of the economy, and hopefully produces income and mobility so they can move up. That's the theory of the economy. And then where does efficiency fit into this picture? Efficiency fits into this picture, next slide, in the following way. that if we pursue efficiency and become ever more efficient, this curve will move smartly to the right, right? So that median family will get ever more prosperous. And we saw that, right, leading up to 1976 for the previous about 3 decades. The median income grew at 2.4% a year, so that there was a doubling of income. So in some sense, that these curves moved out in this way. The richer people also got richer, but the poorer people, even though they may be on the left tail of the distribution, are much better off than they were in previous generations. That was the theory. I would argue the American theory of the way the economy develops. The problem is, even though this worked smartly for 200 years, it started to change in the outcomes that were produced. Okay, so we still had the same theory, but the theory did not produce the outcomes that we were used to. So here's the next slide, please. Here's what changed, right? So you can see in this is the how each kind of percentile did over this period of time, right? With the top jagged line, that's the top 0.01% of families, then the top 0.1%, 1%, and then the bottom 90%. And what you can see happening is that really for most of the 20th century, the lines were kind of stable, right? And in fact, after a peak in 1929 of the top 0.01% and 0.1% and 1% had their peaks, and they actually went down in real terms. And these are real dollars, so they're inflated so that they're real dollars and comparable. But then you can see something happened in the mid-70s that caused the rich to get massively bigger returns from the economy than ever before. And as you can see, it isn't even close, right? It's not even remotely close to the best they've ever done before, while the bottom 90% of the income distribution is relatively speaking flat as a board. And if we go to the next slide, another thing changed quite dramatically. And this is a great slide. I can take no credit for it. It's David Leonhardt at the New York Times with help crunched these numbers that showed, if you just focus on the gray bar or gray line set of dots, what that is in 1980, right? If you had growth in the economy in general, who would see the greatest amount of that income growth from growth in the economy? And the answer is the people on the left are the poorest, the people on the right are the richest. So it turned out that in 1980, the poorest families tend to experience the biggest amount of personal income growth from growth in the economy, and the richest families did the least well with that growth. And I think there's a lot of people who would say, well, kind of that's the way it ought to be, because those people on the left need it more than the people on the right. But in only 34 years, right, from 1980 to 2014, it had reversed completely. And it's stunning, actually, just how complete it is. The relationship is exactly the opposite, which is if the economy grows, it's most likely to end up in the pockets of the 0.01% and least likely to end up in the pockets of the, as it shows here, the fifth percentile among the poorest families. So something changed dramatically in the period, from the period before 1976 and after 1976. And to understand why and how that happened, we have to go to yet another late economist. Next page, a fellow named Wilfredo Pareto. who is an Italian sociologist / economist who came to the conclusion that around the turn of the 20th century, 20% of Italian families owned 80% of the land in Italy, which meant that 80% owned 20%, or not much. In fact, most families own no land whatsoever. And on the basis of his discovery, he has a different distribution named after him. It's on the next page, and that's the Pareto distribution. And what's different from the Gaussian distribution, or normal distribution, remember that had a big hump in the middle, which says the highest number of people are right in the middle. Here, in a Pareto distribution, the highest number of observations, in this case, let's say people, are at the low end. It looks more like a ski slope than a bell, and a very few number of people are way out on the high end. So if this was land in Italy, a very few families own a whole lot of land, and most families own little or no land. That's a very, 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 very different outcome, a very different distribution than the bell curve. And what's happening, I would argue, is on the next page, that Gaussian distribution, normal distribution, bell-shaped distribution that we were used to, and the theory of economic development suggested would happen, isn't happening anymore, and it's becoming more and more of a Pareto distribution. And why that's of concern to me is that there's this magnificent combination I think we have in America, and that is the combination of democracy and capitalism. And what that means is that most of the productive assets in our hands of private individuals, and we are ruled by the majority, the party for whom the majority of Americans vote. And in order to have that maintained, you have to have those economic outcomes be attractive to essentially the median family, right? Because the strip of people around the median family, if they give up on democracy or give up on capitalism, they have the democratic right to shift to something else. And the last time we had a real stagnation of middle incomes of the sort we had currently and have had for the last 44 years, a stagnation of middle incomes, was the Great Depression. And during the Great Depression, worldwide, many countries shifted from a capitalist structure to fascism, socialism, communism. And so that's what has me worried right now about the outcomes that we're now producing. And if you ask why do you get this movement? Next slide, please. Why do we get this movement? It turns out that studies of systems like our economy suggest that when you have something that used to produce bell-shaped distributions, Gaussian distributions, and if you increase pressure on that system enough and decrease the cost of connection within that system, you can take a Gaussian distribution and turn it Pareto. And so what I would say is happening is our absolute obsession with efficiency has resulted in us saying it is critically important to keep on putting more pressure for greater efficiency on the economy through opening trade, through deregulating markets, through enabling kind of outsourcing. All of these things are increasing the pressure on all sorts of markets in this country. And meanwhile, all sorts of costs of connection between aspects in the economy, between buyers and sellers, between across supply chains, etc., have benefited from a decreased cost of connection. So transportation costs are going down, telecommunications costs, the internet is decreasing the cost of connection. So these two features of our economy are fundamentally changing the economic outcomes in a way that nobody ever expected, and nobody, I think, actually wants. And it's showing up in real ways. So if you just look at the pattern of income earned in America, if you go to the next slide, this is a bit of a busy slide, but there are four kinds of occupations, and you could divide the about 112 million working Americans, full-time working Americans, into. They are jobs that are routine in nature, right? So there isn't a lot of independent judgment and decision making. So working on an assembly line would be an example of that. Working as an accounts receivables clerk would be an example of that. You're more told what you're supposed to do, not asked to engage in independent judgment and decision making. And then you can either be working in an industry that happens to be the kind that are clustered in one part of the country, like pharmaceuticals or high tech, and they get scale because they trade to other parts of the country and beyond. Or you can be working in a local industry, and these are the kinds of industries like hair salons, like landscape companies, where they are evenly distributed across the country, and they all tend to be quite small, right? And so it turns out that if you work in one of the routine jobs in a local industry, you're that big block with the yellow stripes on the left-hand side. And the range of your income is that low range, 10 to 15,000 up to about 35,000 for that whole thing. If you have a routine job in one of these traded industries, you're an assembly line worker in an auto factory, you've got that black striped one, a little better. If you are have a creativity intensive job where you're asked to engage in independent judgment and decision making, you're a physician, you're a teacher, you're in the white stripe box, a little bit better. And if you have a creative job in one of these traded industries, so you're a programmer in Silicon Valley, you're in the red striped box. Notice the shape of that curve, right? It's that classic kind of ski slope curve that we saw with the Pareto distribution. And this is how these salaries were arrayed in the year 2000. By 2012, if we look at the next chart, what you can see is that red box is extended enormously out to the right. It's lengthening. The white box with the red stripes is also extending dramatically. So these are the high incomes getting way higher, right? Way higher. And then if you look at the other two boxes, the lower two boxes, they're not moving at all. They're almost exactly the same, especially the box on the left. And so this is just an illustration. In a mere 12 years between 2000 and 2010, we're getting a more and more Pareto distribution of our entire American. This is the entire American workforce. So I'm increasingly nervous and worried about this. And one thing that it's creating is this kind of winner-take-all dynamic, and we get phenomena. We do get these in agriculture, for example. Next slide. These are almond fields in these. Next slide, please. These are almond fields in the Central Valley. No, please, back to the previous slide, please. Thank you. These are almond fields, groves in the Central Valley. 80% of the world's almonds are grown in the Central Valley because it's become the perfect place to grow. We're growing them ever more intensively. It's more competitive than any other place. But with that, you get the uncertainty and the fragility of a monoculture. If there's a blight for almonds in the Central Valley, the entire world supply of almonds virtually will be wiped out. These olive blossoms need to be pollinated at the same time of the year within a short window. So honeybees from all across America have to be shipped in to pollinate these flowers. That's one of the things that people wonder might be behind how many of the honeybees in North America are dying. They're dying because they're shipped around the country to pollinate in these sorts of environments. So what this switch to kind of Pareto distributions is resulting in is more monocultures, and part of the challenge, part of the problem is that our kind of model for the economy is flawed in a fundamental way. Next slide, please. The economy is viewed, and business is viewed more like Amazon, that's on the left-hand side, than the Amazon Inc. versus the Amazon. Amazon Inc. is operated as a big machine where everything is an algorithm. Everything we aim to try and perfect the machine, right? But actually, the economy works more like the Amazon jungle, where it's a complex adaptive system. It's so complex, we can't tell what causes what. It's adaptive, right? It adapts to the way the system works today. Trees will grow in different directions to avoid the growing behind the sun of another tree, in the shadow of another tree. It adapts constantly, and it's a system. It works as a whole. But we're treating the economy and business more and more and more like a machine, a perfectible machine. You can break into pieces, optimize each piece, and add it up to produce something that you want. But as I've shown you, we're not getting what we want. We're getting something dramatically different than what we want. And that's because we need to switch our metaphor from a machine to a complex adaptive system. And in that complex adaptive system, next slide, please, we have to balance this obsession with efficiency with a pursuit of resilience, because that's what you need in a complex adaptive system. It needs to be resilient to shocks. And we're right now weighted far too heavily on efficiency, and it's producing results we don't want. And what that means, and I'll just close with these thoughts. What that means is balancing three things: balancing pressure, the pressure for more efficiency, with productive frictions that stop us from pushing too far. Friction in the form of slack that unfortunately we're trying to eliminate all slack in systems. No, we need slack. W. Edwards Demings actually said that, right? Each of these great philosophers, with the exception, I would argue, of Charles Winslow Taylor, would be rolling over in their grave if they saw how far people have pushed their thoughts. So the great W. Edwards Deming said, "There's an optimum amount of slack. That's a form of friction. So we've got to balance the two. We've got to balance this attempt to machine like Frederick Winslow Taylor tried to perfect things, to say, no, you can't perfect the Amazon jungle. There is no perfect Amazon jungle. All you can do with any complex system is tweak it to improve it, to do little things to tweak it to improve it. So we've got to get away from trying to get the perfect answer to improving. I say this in government legislation. The best government legislations have automatic reviews built into them. It's a rarity, but they've automatically reviews built into them, because there's no such thing as perfect legislation. We should be just trying to improve them. And then the last thing is to balance the desire for more connectedness with the need for some separation. There's been a belief that making the world ever more connected is an unalloyed good. So take down all trade barriers. No, that has to be balanced with times and places where you want to keep things separate. So if we had a little more friction, a view of improving, not perfecting, a little more separation, we'd have more resilience in the economy, and we could get back to distributions that look more Bell and less Pareto. And that will, I believe, help us save this wonderful combination of democracy and capitalism. Next slide. Thank you very much for listening, and I would be delighted to answer any and all questions that I can in the remaining time. Shane, over to you.
Yes, so I'm Shane. My image will get large in just a moment here. But we will take your questions now. If you can submit those in Crowdcast using the Ask a Question button at the bottom center of your screen. If you're watching on YouTube, you can also submit a question in the chat. And please remember to write your question in the form of a question rather than a statement, and try to keep it succinct so that we can get through as many as we can. So the first question I have comes from Arlene. And Arlene is asking about environmental and social justice in the way of viewing the economy, especially given the example with almonds, which Arlene notes, according to Dr. Siddhartha Kara at Harvard's Carr Center, modern slavery is one of the big sites of, is an activist and scholar in modern slavery. So the almond fields, it's one of the biggest sites of modern slavery in the country. How does your way of viewing economics and resilience deal with those human issues?
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess that would be consistent with the point I'm making, right? Which is if we pursue efficiency to the absolute extreme, something like that seems to make sense, right? But it doesn't, right? It's inhumane and it is not resilient. It can't last. It will break down, and that's why you have to have a view that while some more efficiency is often better, you can push it too far and follow it as a religion. And so I think Arlene's point is a nice illustration of the lack of balance between efficiency and resilience. And in that case, I was not aware of that particular human toll, but in that case, the pursuit of efficiency has a dramatic human toll that I think works against resilience, plain and simple.
Mm-hmm. So our next question comes from Rosalind, and Rosalind is wondering about unions. Wasn't deregulation what happened in the 80s, and union busting as well?
Yeah. Yep. I mean, again, that's part of the point I'm making. We said essentially, as an economy, implicitly, lots of these things were sort of said implicitly, that some things have to be sacrificed at the altar of efficiency because that's the altar we're worshiping at, and one of those things can and should be unions, right? That has a resilience cost, at least in my view. Now, do you want to have businesses that are efficient enough to compete? Yes. Do you need to keep your labor costs under some kind of control? Yes. But does that mean that you should say, all kind of all forms of union busting, all forms of outsourcing are fine because we want more efficiency. No, right? That's back to this sense of no balance whatsoever between these opposing forces. And I think we're feeling the impacts, right, in the economy. We're feeling the impacts of having made those decisions and had those jobs shipped to places where I mean, it's maybe good for those places, but it leaves this economy, I think, less resilience and less of the kind of economy we want. And so that my point would not be that's all bad. It's just it was done with no sense of a balance between things. It was sort of, well, net, it'll be all great, because what will happen is our companies will be more efficient with lower labor costs, and so that whole curve, right, that nice bell curve, that'll just keep moving out to the right end. Everybody will be better off. Well, if instead what you're doing is converting that bell curve to a Pareto curve, no, everybody will not be better off. A few people will be better off, a whole lot better off, but not the bulk of people. And again, if we weren't a democracy, that would be just fine, right? Those rich people could be better off, and that's just the way it is. But we are a democracy, and we have to make sure that a lot of people are better off. Hopefully, the entire distribution are better off. But as you saw in that chart, right, when it went from the gray line to the red line, that changed. And I think Americans in general do not kind of really realize the degree to which it's changed. They can kind of feel it, but it's changed in a way that's we got to fix.
Right. And a follow-up to that, Sharon commented on Rosalind's question and is asking, have you seen any legislation which would incorporate your observations? It appears that some law professors and economists are rethinking regulation and antitrust enforcement.
Yeah, I think we're finally seeing some at least discussion of that. Yes, I mean, I think there's a view in both that and in trade. You've got great folks like, if you haven't read them, Danny Rodrigue at the Kennedy School, just making these very lucid arguments with all sorts of data that says we just blithely assumed that more and more open trade would make everybody better off. And it just doesn't, right? It makes some people a lot better off, and some other people never recover from when their factory gets shut down, their industry ends up being shipped somewhere else. They don't just get better off. So I think in trade and antitrust, there's finally some rethinking. Can I point to some legislation that's already passed on that? No, I can't. Unfortunately, not at least in the U.S. But at least a dialogue is starting that is starting to question some of these totally kind of strongly held beliefs that more of whatever it is automatically better.
Thank you for that. Michael asks, what would bring back the bell curve?
Well, and I mean, I guess I would say read the book, because I have half of the book, a little more than half of the book is in recommendations. And what will bring back the bell curve, in my estimation, is that business executives have got to do some things, politicians have got to do some things, educators have got to do some things, and citizens themselves have to do some things. I do not believe that we can get the bell curve back, if you will, with saying government's got to change stuff and they'll fix it, or businesses got to change things, they'll fix it, or citizens can, or educators. We need all of them. And what I have in the book are 18 recommendations spread across those four groups. And I'd like to believe the book is unique in the following respect. I went with really practical things. I said, I will eliminate anything that is theoretical. This guy thinks that this would be a great idea. Nope, none of that. To get to be a recommendation, it either has to be being done successfully in America today, we just need more of it, or it has been done in the past in America or somewhere else and succeeded, or it's being done somewhere else right now and succeeding other than America. So nothing theoretical. It's just all stuff that's demonstrably successful that we've got to do here now, or just do more of, right? So let me give you just a quick illustration. I talk about legislators have got to say we need to have an attitude that says all legislation that we pass is going to show itself to be flawed in some way. It will be gamed by people who take advantage of the rules now that they know them. And instead of saying everything is permanent, because that's the way they're put in place, right? Is to say it should have an automatic review, right? X number of years, it must be reviewed formally and revised based on that. You can say, oh, that'll never work. In Canada, the most important regulation for financial services is the Bank Act, which is way more comprehensive actually act than any single US act. So it's a gigantic, important piece of legislation, one of the most important pieces of legislation in the entire Canadian economy. When it was put in place in 1871, it was put in place with a required formal review every 10 years. So it's not political, right? It's not we're going to repeal and replace because we are of one political party or the other. It's 10 years. The law says this is the kind of review we've got to do, and we've got to revise it for current conditions. Like, which banking system did better in the global financial crisis, Canada or the US? The answer is clear. It's Canada. No bank failures, no bank bailouts, no crash of any sort in the financial system. Well, one of the reasons is that it has a very modern kind of legislation. Because you know what they did in 1992? Canada said, this is working so well, let's make it every 5 years rather than every 10 years. So when 2008-9 hit, our latest version of how we think about regulating the banking system as a whole was less than 5 years old. So is this undoable? No, it's too unwieldy. You could never do it. No, with Canada, it's one of Canada's most important legislations. It's done and has been done super successfully. There is no reason we couldn't do that for every piece of legislation that the U.S. government puts forth. Because you know what would happen, Shane? You wouldn't have an insane amount of fighting and gridlock. I mean, why is there such fighting and gridlock? It's because once it's in for good, right? Mm-hmm. Or for a long time. And there's an object lesson on right now, right? Which is, last time I checked, the Republicans kind of ran for like 5, 6, 7 years on what with Obamacare, repeal and replace. Mm-hmm. And they got what in 2016? The presidency, the House, and the Senate. Did they repeal? No. And I'm not saying this is, I'm making no value judgment on good or bad, but to say despite like, an incredible attempt by one party, nope. So everything is made to be permanent, and in a complex adaptive system, that's nuts. That's absolutely nuts in a complex adaptive system. We have a complex adaptive system, and we treat things as permanent when the system adapts and adapts and adapts, and we should be doing that. And it is totally doable.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you. So our next question comes from Meg, and Meg asks that we're kind of shifting gears here a little bit. Yeah. So Meg asks, if we start incorporating the social environmental costs into the price of products, would that have an effect on the wealth inequality graph that you talk about?
I would hope so, and I would hope so for several reasons. Kind of one, this is consistent again with another of my recommendations, which is it turns out you kind of get in trouble every time you make one measure your unitary goal. Right? What happens is a thing called surrogation, where you, when you have a goal, you want something, you say, well, I have to measure that or I won't know whether I'm getting that. So you're Wells Fargo, right? And you say, we want deeper customer relationships. How would we measure the depth of a customer relationship? Oh, more accounts per customer. They have a credit card and a mortgage and a savings account, a CD. That means a deeper relationship, right? And so that's what we're all about: deeper relationships measured by number of accounts. What happens over time is that number of accounts becomes seen as deeper relationships. It's surrogated for it. It becomes the thing when it isn't really. It's just a measurement of the thing. And that creates, and in that case, what happened, right? People said, yes, we'll get deeper relationships. We'll send Shane a credit card that he didn't actually apply for, right? And of course that blows up totally in their face and almost destroys the entire bank and its reputation forever. So the solution to that is to have multiple measures, because it'll keep you from surrogating, right? And so there are two reasons to have environmental, social goals as well as a financial goal, right? One is because you care about society and the environment, which is good. A second is it keeps you from surrogating. You'll have to balance these things. And remember my last slide, it's all about balance. We're getting unbalanced with a unitary pursuit of efficiency measured by lower labor costs, or measured by a bid-ask spreads on the stock market, or measured by average tariff levels, or measured by amount of deregulation. As soon as you do that, you end up going kind of wacky in pursuit of that one thing. And if you have these things you have to balance, you just naturally have to live with this sense of, well, we could manufacture more items faster by dumping the sewage into the lake. But we have this goal of having a clean environment. So how can we balance those two things? And you just get better, I think, at balancing those over time, rather than just kind of doing one thing. So what I would hope is that would make organizations perform better in a more balanced way, and it would move us away from the forces that are pushing us towards Pareto and back to forces that are producing Bell. So a little bit of a long answer, but it's a good and sort of complicated question.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hopefully that answered it.
Thank you. So sort of a more relevant question for you. How has our time in isolation and working from home changed the greater perception of efficiency?
I suspect, I mean, the answer, the true answer is I don't know. Everybody's going to have a different probably experience of it. But what I would say is I think a lot of people are kind of learning something about what an obsession with perceived efficiency has done to their lives, right? So I mean, I don't know about you, Shane, but I know lots of people who say, ain't doing that. I ain't commuting an hour and a half every day, when it is patently obvious that if I came in once a week or twice a week and did the rest remotely, I'd get back all that time that I spent on the freeways or the expressways or the bus or whatever. And I can be as effective as I was. So I think sort of blind pursuit of things that you thought made you more efficient because you never tried another approach. I think lots of people have had this giant natural experiment, as the scientists would call it. This is one big natural experiment, with a tragic side, with 1 million humans dying from it. So, but it is this time when people are forced to explore a new way of being. And I don't know about you, Shane, but I do think that we aren't going to go back to the same style of work. I personally think that's a good thing. What I've been saying to the people who ask me stuff about this, I say what companies are going to have to do is figure out how to divvy up work into 3 buckets. One bucket is in-person, face-to-face. Another bucket is synchronous distance. That's what we're doing, Shane. Synchronous distance at the same time, and then a third kind is asynchronous distance, which is when you put this up on the web and people can watch it whenever they want. That's asynchronous distance. And I think work can be optimized to be done best in one of those 3 forms. Right now, we assume face-to-face is the thing that we use for virtually everything, although everybody on this call, I think, knows that an hour or 2 of the work a day at least is asynchronous distance. It's called get through your email, right?
Right.
There's a view that face-to-face is what you need, and I think that's the case for some activities, and we're going to have to figure what of those activities we need that and curate those activities so people say, yeah, I want to come into the office for that because that is really exciting, that's productive, I really enjoy it. But if we say come into the office for everything, they're going to say, I don't think so. So that's I think a job for organizations, not just companies. All sorts of organizations are going to have to figure that out, because if we just say, face-to-face is over, I think you're going to miss some things. I think there's probably something plus or minus 5%, 20% of work that I think is optimally done face-to-face. Probably then the biggest chunk is optimally done distance synchronous, and then there's another chunk that is done distance asynchronous, and might be 20, 50, 30 or something like that. Don't hold me to the numbers, but I think it's something like that. But what that means is that downtown A office space is going to crater in value.
Right. Well, thank you for that answer. So we have time for one more question, and this comes from Quina. They ask, what is one economic policy change that would significantly drive the changes that your book suggests is needed?
Well, I guess I will go back. I will go back to the government one. It's every legislation with a requirement for review. In terms of policies, I would stop writing trade agreements. We've opened up this economy plenty. We've got plenty of efficiency from them. Just stop, knock it off with we gotta lower trade barriers even more. Like, I don't want to be isolationist or protectionist, but again, it's when more is not better. We do not need more freer trade. So I'd knock it off on that. And the other thing I'd do is I'd go back to the original purpose of antitrust legislation, flat out. I would take on the monopolizing giants that have kill zones where they'll kill anything that's in their zone. That's all anti-competitive behavior as laid out in Sherman and Clayton, and I'd go after them. And my least popular thing with at least kind of wealthy people is I would return to higher marginal tax rates for wealthy earners. It worked great from the 30s to the end of the 70s. total flattening of those now has, in my view, I just say you can't point to how that's made the economy better and work better. And so we had proof that it worked. It worked great during the period of great American growth, American domination economically, productivity growth, everything. So why do we think a tax regime that we've had in place for 40 years, 35 years is awesome when we can't point to anything that makes it awesome? An unpopular view with some, but it is what it is. I kind of go with I gotta have, I'm a practical guy. I gotta have demonstration that something is a good idea for it to be a good idea. I'll try anything, right? But I will say, here's what we have to show it doing, and if it doesn't do that thing, you stop doing it. So that would be. She asked for one, or she or he, I forget, asked for one. That's I'll give you 5.
There you go. Well, any final thoughts before we conclude for the evening?
Well, I'm optimistic. I mean, I think we've had a tricky situation, but I'm very optimistic. America is adaptive, which is great. And what we just have to do is think a little more carefully about our models. We're a complex adaptive system. We're more like the Amazon than Amazon Inc. Let's stop thinking about a perfectible machine, and let's stop thinking all amounts of efficiency are good. And I think we can. I think we're walking a little bit towards a little bit of a cliff. I think we just have to start stepping back, and we'll be fine. So in the end, I think we've got a challenge, but I'm optimistic about being able to tackle it.
Wonderful. Well, thank you to Roger for being here this evening, and thank you for everyone else for tuning in. If you enjoyed this event, you can find more like it on our website, townhallseattle.org. We hope you'll consider making a donation, as your support will allow us to continue to provide events just like this one. If you are interested in purchasing a copy of Roger's book, When More Is Not Better, Overcoming America's Obsession with Economic Efficiency, please use the link on this live stream page to purchase through our friends at Third Place Books. And finally, thank you again for being here. Have a great evening, everyone.
Thank you, Shane.
Thank you.